everyone. It's Denise from Davi Books. Happy Saturday. So, what I did is I made my second trip to that big book sale in Santa Barbara, and I got some more books. Surprise. Of course, by this time, it's only I would say, the last 3 days of the sale. I think it ends tomorrow or Monday. So, it goes on for about 10 days. And when I first went there, of course, was within its first 3 days. One of those days. I'm sorry, my glasses are not sitting right. And of course, the place was full of books and full of people. And there's always this sectioned off area within the warehouse that has stacks and stacks of boxes with more books in them. And when I went yesterday, all those boxes were gone. So I kind of thought to myself, gosh, what did I miss out on? But I thought, it's okay. I'm fine. There's another sale next year, and there's plenty of other mini sales that I can access. So, and I will live a full and complete life anyway, right? All right. So let me show you what I got. First one by Saul Bellow, Herzog. I've been wanting to get something from Saul Bellow. I've been hearing so much. His name just keeps popping up, and I know that's like my signal to say you need to get something from Saul Bellow. So Herzog. Now it was interesting because the summary on the back of the book made me realize, okay, I think I would enjoy reading this. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, here's this little summary. This is the story of Moses Herzog, a great sufferer, joker, mourner, and charmer. Although his life steadily disintegrates around him, he has failed as a writer and a teacher, as a father, and has lost the affection of his wife to his best friend. Herzog sees himself as a survivor, both of his private disasters and those of the age. He writes unsent letters to friends and enemies, colleagues, and famous people, revealing his wry perception of the world and the innermost secrets of his heart. What an interesting character. So I think I want to read this, definitely. So, Herzog by Saul Bellow. This one sold for $2. The next one I got, now this intrigued me. The title itself intrigued me. I said, okay, I think I might want to read this. It's by George Bernanos, and it's the diary of a country priest. And it's like it's ringing a bell. Have I read something about a pastor or a I know this the British term, vicar. And I think I've had some exposure to that, of course, reading some of Jane Austen's novels, and you get a little taste of what a vicar's life is like during that era in English history. Plus, I think in my own Catholic upbringing, there was he was canonized a saint, French. And I'll remember when I don't need to remember it anymore. But he also wrote a sort of diary of the struggles he went through personally and in his position as a priest. And those sorts of former stories and novels and stuff that I read just intrigued me, because this is maybe no one would think, oh, why would I want to know what's going on in some priest or vicar's life? Because in my mind, it's something that no one wants to hear about, but they have their struggles. Something about it intrigues me. The people that go out with their happy face and all is well, but what's going on beneath the surface? So it intrigues me. So this is one I'm going to read by George Bernanos. Again, The Diary of a Country Priest. When was this originally published? 1937. Okay. This I think sold for $3. The next one I got is The Protestant Reformation, edited by Hans Hildebrand. And it was, I don't know. Okay, so this is a collection of primary sources pertaining to the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. Okay, so edited by, meaning, yeah, he put it together and selected everything. So part one covers Martin Luther and the German Reformation. There are many writings by Martin Luther in this section, as well as John Tetzel. And who's the other person? No. The second part covers the division of the Reformation. You have Conrad Grebel, Augustine Worldsberger, Elizabeth, a Dutch Anabaptist martyr. Part 3 covers John Calvin and his influence. A couple of his writings, one of them being The Institutes of the Christian Religion, which is something I've been looking everywhere for, and I found it in here. The fourth part is the English Reformation, and there are writings from William Tyndale, Thomas Cranmer, John Field, and Thomas Wilcox. And part 5 covers the postlude, a new age, with a question mark, and there is a writing by Sebastian Castellio. So this will be great because I will be venturing into this time in history just after the medieval period is over. And I love that this is a collection of primary sources. All right, this one was how much? $2. Next one, this is excellent. The Story of My Life by Helen Keller. And I shared with you how I found out, you know, what a rebel she was, if you could say, in her adult life that I never heard about because, you know, as children, they just tell us about her as a child and they don't tell us about how she fought for women's suffrage and against slavery. And she was one of the original members of the ACLU, all these things that we never learned as kids about Helen Keller. I'm hoping that, since she wrote this, that I'm going to find her thoughts and experiences on more of her adult life. It's a given that there's going to be a portion of this book that's going to cover her childhood, but I'm hoping that this is going to include more of her adult life. If not, I'll just keep at it. I don't know, this doesn't look like it was much. This was $2. Next one, A World Lit Only by Fire, The Medieval Mind and the Renaissance, Portrait of an Age by William Manchester. He also wrote The Last Lion about Winston Churchill. This looks very interesting. From tales of chivalrous knights to the barbarity of the Inquisition and the misery of the Black Death, no era has been a greater source of awe, horror, and wonder than the Middle Ages. In graceful prose and with the authority of his extraordinary gift for narrative history, William Manchester leads us from a civilization teetering on the brink of collapse to the grandeur of its rebirth during the Renaissance, a dense explosion of energy that spawned some of history's greatest poets, philosophers, painters, adventurers, and reformers, as well as some of its most spectacular villains. Good reading. Next one. This looks fun. Just the title alone made me smile, so I knew I had to get it. English History Made Brief, Irreverent, and Pleasurable by Lacey Baldwin Smith. So it won me over just by the title. And it says here, spiced with dozens of hilarious cartoons from Punch and other publications, English history will be a welcome and amusing tour of a land that has always fascinated Americans, Anglophiles and Anglophobes alike. It looks like it's going to be a blast. And this one was $2. The next one I got is by Ernest Hemingway, A Movable Feast. I liked the cover too. There was something very formal about it. Just something about it, just the lines, beautiful picture of Hemingway. Something about that cover drew my attention. So this, I believe this was his last book, and it was published posthumously. Yeah, published posthumously in 1964. A Movable Feast, Ernest Hemingway's classic memoir of Paris in the 1920s, remains one of his most beloved works. Since Hemingway's personal papers were released in 1979, scholars have examined and debated the changes made to the text before publication. Now, this new special restored edition presents the original manuscript as the author intended it to be published. I bet you this was $2. No, this was $4. Looks like it has pictures in it. See the pages? See that white section? Let's see. Yeah. So here's a handwritten manuscript page from chapter 1. Look at his writing. His writing leans down, so it leans down towards the right. I would love to see what a handwriting analyst would have to say about that. And there are pictures of him. Oh my gosh, look how young he looks. And here he is, Hadley. I think Hadley was his first wife. This is Gertrude Stein. And this is Shakespeare and Company, a picture of them in front of the bookstore in Paris, Shakespeare and Company. Wow. I think Shakespeare and Company opened during Hemingway's time in Paris, if I'm not mistaken. And this, of course, is inside the bookstore, right? Yep. This is inside the Paris bookstore, Shakespeare and Company. And it really became the watering hole, basically, of a lot of prominent writers, names we know now that are pretty famous, that are in the canon of, the Western canon and what have you. And when I was in Paris, of course, I did not have the time to go and look inside this store. Really? Why did I even bother going to Paris? Really, it just wasn't worth it if I couldn't go to Shakespeare and Company, but I will go back again. So there we go, A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. $4. Okay. Next one, Gender and History, The Limits of Social Theory in the Age of the Family by Linda J. Nicholson. And what it says back here is, since the slogan, "The personal is political," gained currency in the 1970s, liberal, radical, and Marxist feminists have debated just how personal the political is, the degree of overlap between the public and private spheres. In this book, Linda Nicholson analyzes this debate within the contemporary women's movement and claims that its terms were set by 18th and 19th century thinkers dealing with newly emerged institutions. This is going to be one of those, academic reads that I love to have. So there we go. And the author, Linda J. Nicholson, is Associate Professor in Women's Studies and Philosophy of Education at the State University of New York, Albany. And this is a Columbia University Press publication. How much was this one? $3. And the next one, I love this one. I'm not big on hardbacks, but I liked this one as is. And it is by Albert Hourani, A History of the Arab Peoples. The cover is just beautiful. The book itself, it's just something about this book that's just beautiful to me. I want to see what this is. Now, the author, Albert Hourani, is Emeritus Fellow, St. Antony's College, Oxford. His books include Arabic Thought in the Liberal Age, Europe and the Middle East, and The Emergence of the Modern Middle East. And snippets of what it says. And I liked how this first paragraph states it. Despite the turmoil of Arab nationalism and fundamentalism, Middle Eastern wars, and oil crises, the history of the Arab world has been little known and poorly understood in the West. One reason may be that for more than half a century, there has been no up-to-date single-volume work that chronicles the story of Arab civilization until now. Good point. When I think of the other author, Edward Said, who wrote Orientalism, he also was trying to educate Westerners about the Middle East. I'm sure most of us have really flawed ideas about people from the Middle East. We've got identities all wrong. This covers the founding of Islam and how it affected and changed the Middle East and the areas around it. He talks about the Ottoman Empire. And also, I'm sure he's going to cover how in Andalusia, which was, especially in Cordoba, Spain, when it was still inhabited by Muslims, that it was such a cosmopolitan location. There you could find all the great books. You had the great scientists and philosophers there. People from different uh, religious denominations could gather there and converse and exchange ideas. You had Jews going there, you had Christians going there, you had Muslims going there. And it was wonderful. It was just a beautiful golden time in uh, well, Islamic history. And that's all part of this Middle Eastern history as well. So I, I'm glad I found this book. This is really neato, and I'm sure this was $4. It's 458 pages. So that was the other one I got. And one more. This book, you know, looking for books is hard work, you know. So you get kind of hungry and tired at the end of the day. So I went to Island's restaurant. I ordered, Malibu burger and a beer and just chilled out. And I picked one of the books to read, and I chose this one, Deep Reading: Practices to Subvert the Vices of Our Distracted, Hostile, and Consumeristic Age. I thought, it's by three authors, Rachel B. Griffiths, Julie Ooms, and Rachel M. D. Smith Roberts. And there were certain points brought up. I've only gotten as far as the introduction, which I'm not quite done with, almost done with. But there were some points they made in this that I thought, this is going to be interesting. Now, these authors, just in reading that introduction, I can tell they are addressing the Christian community. But the way they're going about deep reading applies to everyone. And they bring up the faults of, let's say, when you have teachers, for example, and they'll say in this here, a similar tension between what is read and how it is read appears in another type of reading list familiar to both students and teachers in Western education. First, they addressed like Mortimer Adler, how to read a book, and the reading list that they gave at the end. She says, we have lots of lists as to what to read. But now she's going to address something else, another reading list. And the reading lists and schedules presented on course syllabi in high school or college. On these lists, teachers detail course textbooks complete with ISBNs, volumes, and editions. They match texts and page numbers with the dates of class meetings. On the first day of the semester, they direct students to these lists and instruct them to complete the reading assignments by the corresponding date in the schedule. Students, in their turn, are confronted with these required texts as the content around which the semester's work is built. Though these rituals occur unremarkably at the onset of a course, teachers, like the authors of books on reading we mentioned above, have nevertheless assembled their reading lists through deliberate, painstaking effort. They may wrestle with whether the list represents sufficient historical coverage. Does it contain a variety of perspectives, including those from underrepresented communities? Does it prompt moral and ethical reflection? Does the number of pages assigned for each day sufficiently challenge students without overwhelming them? After wrestling with these questions, however, instructors usually set students loose to tackle Moby Dick or Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letter from a Birmingham Jail, or Karl Barth's sermons, or the Book of Judges, without further guidance. As students take the plunge or not, their teachers' actions communicate the assumption that students know how to read a text well enough to account for its form and content, a kind of reading that differs substantially from skimming, which they have likely already practiced. Teachers frequently lament that students lack the skills, knowledge, and motivation to complete reading assignments. Yet educators continue to create reading lists and schedules and point students to these authoritative documents without actively showing their students how to read. Assigning the right books or assembling the perfect reading list is not enough for the moral and intellectual formation of the 21st century reader. We need practices that will help us acknowledge and grapple with the distractions of the digital age, the hostility of a polarized culture, particularly for minority culture groups, and Western consumerism with its demands that every action be marketable. And I loved that approach. Another snippet, they said, deep reading book therefore functions as a manual for reading practices that do not depend on certain kinds of texts, but apply to any work meant to be read deeply. We do not subscribe to or endorse strategies focused on inculcating readers with marketable skills, though our book indeed emphasizes practices rather than content. And I know I highlighted something else that also caught my attention. I think it's on page. Here it is. Adler and Van Doren, so referring back to How to Read a Book. Adler and Van Doren's infamous How to Read a Book is the logical outcome of what Weber calls the Protestant ethic. Weber is a historian, and he wrote a book that I own. It's called, where is it? Protestant Ethic. The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. I have that book. I read portions of it during my last semester. I'm going to be reading more of it. But it says here, finally, reading itself has been co-opted for consumerist ends and in ways that exacerbate temptations toward hostility and distraction. Learning to engage practices that are disconnected from measurable goals or instant gratification is particularly difficult in the world of social media, the gig economy, and new apps. Reading is considered useless if it fails to generate a return on investment. How many times have we seen this as booktubers, fallen into that trap as booktubers? We give ourselves these little challenges and stuff, and I think we focus too much on how many rather than how well, and I think it's an important thing to remember, especially I think what they're trying to emphasize with books that are meant to be read deeply. Are we actually doing that? Do we know how to do that? And in referring to this return on investment and quantity and whatnot, they expand on it and say Adler and Van Doren's infamous How to Read a Book is the logical outcome of what Max Weber, calls the Protestant ethic where reading is concerned. Adler and Van Doren provide a manual for reading productively for information and understanding. Ends they contrast with reading for entertainment. And that is in reading some Puritan authors, everything had to be done for the glory of God. So any housework you did, any work outside the house you did, it all had to be for the purpose of glorifying God. You couldn't waste any time. You always had to be busy all the time because you couldn't waste the time. You had to, what was the term? I forgot the term, but it has to do with you can't waste the minutes of your day because those are days those are seconds and minutes and hours that you could be using doing something productive for the glory of God. Busy, 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 busy. I can't imagine. I know people who still do that. They feel guilty if they just sit around and do nothing for a little while, and everybody needs that. And this Protestant ethic, and for the Puritans with that Protestant ethic, reading for pleasure was considered sinful. You had to read something that was going to edify you as a Christian, build you up, help you to grow as a Christian. If you just read for pleasure, that was selfish, and that was a vice. It was simply sinful. And that's what these authors are saying, that Van Doren and Adler, their view on reading for understanding, and what was the other word they used? And information. That's that work ethic thing. And that's not what reading is. Some reading is like that, yes. Some reading is hard work. But not all reading is that. Reading for entertainment is part of the joy of reading, right? Some things make us laugh, some things make us cry, some things are just a wonderful coasting through a story and just enjoying yourself the whole time. Great. But how many of us know how to really read deeply when what we're reading requires us to read deeply? And I think that's what they're emphasizing here. And one other point they made, which I don't have a quote on, but I'm remembering it well, is that they also talk about what is often done in Christian circles, whether it's a Christian elementary school or high school or a Christian college, they always encourage their students to read through the Christian lens. And what that basically does is, as they argue, it puts a wall up, a divider up. So there's us and them, the Christians, the non Christians. And that wasn't necessarily the objective of the teachers, instructing their students to do that. This was done in order to have their students filter their reading with, because there's the virtue ethics, I guess you could say. They want reading to instill virtue in their young readers, and they want that reading to show exemplary characters, things to admire, that sort of, you set up the positive, and they want that example to be recognized by their students. But inadvertently, the authors believe that it has set up that divider of us and them. Why not just read the text, as this work of literature? Take everything else out and just read this as literature. Another argument they make. And I think I made a good choice when I grabbed this. So I've started reading it. I'm like a page shy of finishing the introduction, and then I'm going to start with chapter 1. So instead of putting this aside for when I finish my other books, I've just thrown another book on the TBR stack. So there we go. Now, that's everything I got. I think I paid something like $23 for all these books, and I have to hold them up for you. These are all the books I got at the Santa Barbara sale. Isn't it lovely? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 books. 10 books. Not bad. And just a few days prior, I had gone to a Barnes & Noble, I think 40 minutes away because of the road that I had to travel, because there was a book that one of our fellow booktubers mentioned, Marilyn Maya Mendoza. I was reading books for Hispanic Heritage Month, and she mentioned an author, P.D. Thomas. He lived in the streets of Spanish Harlem. And this is his life story. This is a memoir that he wrote. And it was 30 years ago. Wow. And Marilyn said how she enjoyed this and how she recommended it. So I looked it up. I thought, well, great, I'd love to read another book for Hispanic Heritage Month. And this one Barnes & Noble that was 40 minutes away had it. So I drove out there, and I ended up finding the book, Down These Mean Streets by P.D. Thomas. And I found a couple of other books. So let me show you those. This is the Saturday Night Ghost Club. This was, if you go to Barnes & Noble and you go to the cafe, sometimes they'll have books there that they're having a special sale on, and I buy this for $5 if I purchase something at the cafe, which I always do. So I got this book for $5. What a cute story. This is like a middle grade book. And it's set in the 1980s, which is cool. So growing up in the 1980s Niagara Falls, a seedy but magical, slightly haunted place, Jake Baker spends most of his time with his uncle Calvin, a kind but eccentric enthusiast of occult artifacts and conspiracy theories. The summer Jake turns 12, he befriends a pair of siblings new to town. And so Calvin initiates them all into the Saturday Night Ghost Club. But as the summer goes on, what begins as a seemingly lighthearted project will uncover mysteries darker than any of its members, young or grown, had imagined. So this looked like a wonderful book to read. So this is going to go into my October stack. I have all these paranormal spookies and stuff that I want to read for the month of October, and this is going in that stack. And then the last book that I added to it was this one, Our America, A Hispanic History of the United States. I'm always looking for U.S. history from different perspectives. So I ended up grabbing this one by Felipe Fernandez Armesto. And he is the William P. Reynolds Professor of History at the University of Notre Dame, is the author of Pathfinders, A Global History of Exploration. He lives in South Bend, Indiana, and London. Cool. So this is going to be to my U.S. history collection. Now, last but not least, let me show you the books that I've collected so far that I'm going to read for October. They're all spookies. This one by Stephen King, Carrie. I've seen the movie. I never have read the book. So I'm going to read this one. The next one I'm going to read is by Shirley Jackson, The Haunting of Hill House. I have seen the series, and I think it was an HBO series. Never read the book. Next one, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the 1818 text. I'm going to read that one. Never read that. And the last one that I have, I wanted to read a Joe Hill book. But the big one that I have is called Heart-Shaped Box, but it's kind of thick. I think average thick, but because I have several TBR for October, I thought, well, maybe I should pick another one. So this one, which is a book that I got from, it's a special edition book. Something fell, there it is. This is a special edition series by Subterranean Press, Late Returns by Joe Hill. And it comes in a lovely slipcase. I love the color green in here. And Late Returns, look at this, a bookmobile. Some of us remember these things. I do. It's one of these things that introduced me to the love of books. So this is a big, it warms my heart to see this picture. Let me tell you what it's about. Commercial truck driver John Davies finds out about the death of his parents from a letter written by his father. He returns to their modest family home in Kingswood, New Hampshire, to deal with the aftermath, where, in his shoebox under the bed, he finds his mother's overdue copy of the novel, Another Marvelous Thing. When he brings it to the local library, he ends up with a gig driving a vintage bookmobile covered in psychedelic literary murals. It feels meant to be, especially given that his parents first met in the very same vehicle, grabbing for the lone copy of A Portrait of Joan Baez. In a story that's strongly reminiscent of Jack Finney, John soon learns that the bookmobile doesn't only receive visitors from the present. Ghosts known as late returns show up from time to time, seeing books from the future as blurs or with magically transformed jackets that fit their period. They show up looking for stories only the bookmobile can give them. But John begins to wonder if he can change their pasts, if he can save those in need of it. Looks good. Sounds good. Late Returns by Joe Hill from Subterranean Press. So this so far is going to be my stack of books. Where's one more? There it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books that I'm going to be reading in the month of October. All right, that's it, everybody. Thank you for sitting out for this long, drawn-out video. Have a wonderful Saturday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Be safe and stay together. I love you all. I'll see you in just a few days. Bye-bye.